Reagan administration sponsored something very radical, an actual redistribution of wealth, cutting taxes for the rich and cutting social programs for the poor and the working class. So the money flowed uphill.
Author and political activist Barbara Ehrenreich. Today on Now I've Heard Everything, I'm Bill Thompson. The wealth gap between America's 1% and all the rest of us is wide and getting wider. But it didn't start with us. Well, at least not all of us. In 1989, Barbara Ehrenreich, the political activist and author, she highlighted the struggles that the middle class was, not just the poor, but the middle class was having. And we're talking about the professional middle class, the white-collar middle class. Now, what is startling and sobering about this 36-year-old interview is how much it foreshadows exactly what our economy still looks like today. Barbara Ehrenreich called her book Fear of Falling. And you'll hear what she says the fear is in just a moment. I was in my mid-30s when I did this interview, and I have to tell you, it spoke to me. Oh, and by the way, in this interview, when you're listening to it, when she refers to young workers just entering the workforce and with their hopes and dreams, Gen X, she's talking to you. She's talking about you. So, in just a moment, my conversation with Barbara Ehrenreich.
They say what's old is new again. You're about to see if that's true as you listen to an interview from noted radio personality Bill Thompson's 30-year archive. Enjoy.
So here now from 1989, Barbara Ehrenreich.
I thought I read a magazine article somewhere that said there is no more middle class.
I may have written it, actually. No, because in a statistical sense, the middle class is shrinking. If you just look at how many people are in the middle range of income, that's been going down as we become a more polarized society. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting richer, and there's a real split going on in the middle, with the blue and pink collar working class people sliding downwards, and the group that I write about, in Fear of Falling, the professional white-collar middle class, holding its own or actually doing perhaps a little better than before.
Where does the fear come from?
Well, one is the obvious kind of fear of losing ground economically, which I think afflicts people, everybody except the very, very rich probably. We face housing costs that are astronomical in so many areas, and college tuition costs. See, those are like the criteria for being middle class in some sense. Own your own home, send the kids to college, and we're all worried about that. Or we're worried that if we can do it, our children won't be able to do it. There's real reason for alarm there. But there's another fear of falling that I'm discussing, which is something more subtle, not perhaps totally rational, and which is very much a feature of the upper middle or professional middle class, and that's a fear of going soft, losing the drive and the self-discipline that it takes to achieve in this professional middle class. I mean, if you think about it, if you're rich, you know your children will be rich because you can just leave them the money. Okay, and so long as they keep out of jail or whatever, they'll be rich. But in the professional middle class, you cannot bequeath your position. If you're a doctor, the child has to start all over again in pre-K, go all the way through residency and whatever. I mean, the children have to go through the same long haul. So there's real anxiety in this class that if you get to be affluent, everybody wants to be affluent, that you'll get spoiled. The children will get spoiled, and you won't be able to make it.
There's no way out of that paradox, though, because there's so many of us were brought up by parents who had it not as good as we now have it, and we want our children to have it better than we had it, but you can't keep that cycle going forever, can you?
No, it's probably ended. I mean, we've probably sort of leveled off in terms of each generation doing better. Certainly that's true in the blue and pink collar working class, that things are going downhill. In the professional middle class, I talk to young people and they say, I don't know if I'll ever own a home. My parents did. So, if they're yuppies, they won't have a home, but they'll have raspberry vinegar on the table or some other little mark of status to show that they really are in this professional middle class.
There's an upheaval coming, isn't there? I mean, we have to change the whole way we define what success is and define what our goals and dreams are. If our goal has been to outdo our parents, if they had a 3-bedroom house, we got to have a 4-bedroom house. They had 2 cars, we better have at least 2 nicer cars, or maybe 3 cars.
Oh, I think so. I mean, the pressure is too intense. For one thing. I mean, it's the hustle. I mean, if you're a young professional couple, you're already facing enormous costs maybe for a private nursery school for your child, and on and on and on. There seems to be no end in sight. And it takes a toll. One toll, for example, that concerns me, is in the last 8 or 9 years, there's been a stampede of college students away from majors like English or social science or poetry or math into those things they think you can make a lot of money in fast. And that could be law, banking, business. Well, we certainly need people with those skills, but it's very sad, I think, when people are giving up their idealism at the age of 18 or 19 because they feel pressured to make so much money just to remain in what they consider the middle class. The middle income in America today, the median family income is $30,000 a year. Not very high. But that won't buy you the house. That won't buy you the private college educations for the kids. So if you want to be middle class in a sense of owning those things, you practically have to be wealthy, at least by the terms of our parents. And that's a lot of pressure.
What prompted you to take on this task?
When I was interested in the professional middle class, which is only 20% of the population by the most generous count, because this is the class that contains our opinion makers, the people who give our nation its self-image, our commentators, pundits, professors, journalists, writers like me, talk show people like you. So there's a class with an enormous amount of influence over our society, and yet nobody really looks hard at it and says, what are the limitations and biases of this class? And I'm convinced, and I write about, some of the unconscious prejudices that professional middle-class people have toward everybody else, stereotypes of the poor, stereotypes of the working class, which come, I think, from being rather narrow in people's range of associations or just believing what experts say. This is how those people are. And we reproduce the stereotype that the blue-collar worker is dumb, bigoted, reactionary, Archie Bunker type. That has hardly changed at all in 20 years. The stereotype that people in poverty are all lazy, promiscuous, incapable of winding an alarm clock and getting up in the morning going to work. Neither of these are accurate, I should say. The blue and pink collar working class is actually more liberal politically and in many kinds of surveys than the so-called liberal elite in the professional middle class. The poor, well, they get slandered in many ways, but most adults in poverty are working or raising children full-time. They're just working at low wages. Poverty really is not a psychological condition. It is a lack of money.
After this short break, Barbara Ehrenreich traces the origins of today's wealth gap.
If you've ever wondered where to find the captivating books we discuss on Now I've Heard Everything, wonder no more.
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
Plus, when you purchase through our affiliate links, you're not only diving into great stories, but also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 1989 conversation with Barbara Ehrenreich.
There must be so many things, though, that you have to embrace when you're trying to give us a snapshot, as it were, of the professional middle class. And there's so many avenues you could have gone. How did you choose which ones to pursue and which would have to wait till the next book, perhaps?
Well, it wasn't easy, and the truth is that I followed my curiosity often. And this is the class that usually passes judgment about other classes. They tell us how other people live. They tell us how to think. So it was a new thing, I think, to turn the focus on this class and say, all right, you're the opinion makers, you're the culture makers. What do you think? What are your anxieties and prejudices? But that took me far afield of simply political or sociological kinds of themes to, child raising. This is a class that's very, very obsessively worried about child raising, tends to do it by the book. This is a class that's intensely preoccupied with physical fitness at this point. So that was something else I got into. This is a class that is very anxious about status and finding little ways to signal status. It's how you dress. Do you wear natural fibers or synthetic? Do you eat sushi or big whoppers? It's a class that's very, very concerned that people recognize its status. So I went in all those directions too.
Does part of this come from the fact that during the baby boom there are so many, that pig in the python? If you use that analogy, if you look at the figures, they make sense. There's only a limited number of jobs in a given sector. There's only a limited number of dollars available with which to have a better life than your parents. Isn't it inevitable that some of those people in that baby boom group are not going to be as well off? They're going to have to get by with lower expectations.
Yes, it's not only demographic. A similar sort of polarization of growing inequality is happening in many countries in the world now. I don't know if we entirely understand why. It's been very marked in the United States. About half of the new jobs generated in the 70s and 80s by the economy are paying near poverty wages. Yeah, people have filled those jobs. People are filling those jobs. Only a minority gets into the $40,000 a year, professional, fairly comfortable jobs. And they feel pinched, too, at that level. So there is something. We do have to, I think you're right, we have to stand back at some point and say, where are we going with this? We have a steeply hierarchical society. It's getting more unequal with every passing year. We haven't seen policies coming from the government to even attempt to reverse that. Is this how we want to live?
Is it the government's responsibility to try to reverse it?
Well, it certainly, I think, should be the government's responsibility not to promote growing inequality. And sadly, that's what happened. The Reagan administration sponsored something very radical, an actual redistribution of wealth. But it was a redistribution of wealth upwards toward the wealthy. And they did this by cutting taxes for the rich and cutting social programs for the poor and the working class. So the money flowed uphill. And that accentuated this deepening inequality. We shouldn't be doing things like that, obviously. I think, if you want to, the two things the government could do would be to reverse those policies that have put so much of the tax burden downward on the middle class, the working class, may have a more steeply escalated, graded tax rate. And the second thing is to look at opening up opportunities to education again. We cut financial aid in the Reagan years. We cut student loans. We made it harder to get student loans. Education is the ticket to upward mobility. And so those would be two key things, I think.
But so many times we were told, well, the middle class has borne the brunt, and these changes will make it so that they don't have to bear that burden so much anymore.
Yes, I think some of the burden should be lifted off. Certainly the people in the middle of the income range. Perhaps people well up into what we would consider the upper middle class today are suffering from the anxiety of the cost crunch that they're in too. But I look around and I see Malcolm Forbes has $2 million to spare for a birthday party. I see Leona Helmsley with her attitudes or contempt for the rest of us who actually pay our taxes. We see the Donald Trump types. I think there's a revulsion against that. I call it the bloated overclass and its behavior. And I think that we will be seeing our way to tax the rich more effectively and take the burden off of other people.
No, I'm probably not telling you anything new when I say that economists look at the situation that we have with this widening gap between the very rich and the very poor, and they say, that's just what happened just before the crash in '29.
Yes. No, I've read that. I don't know enough to really comment on that, but yeah, it's scary.
Without getting into the macroeconomics of it, which I don't understand either, do you sense that there's enough of a polarization there that there could be just a very sharp split that would rend the country as the crash of '29 did?
It's possible that this polarization could lead to a crash, because what happens is that a lot of people, as they slide down, are no longer able to consume things that are produced. So marketing gets increasingly concentrated on an upper middle to upper class, the upscale folks. The magazines, beam to them. Products are designed for them. And when you have underconsumption by a majority, you can have a crash. The other danger, though, I hate to think of crashes. The other danger, though, is that as you get more polarized, what you lose is democracy. You can't really have decent, kind of democratic dialogue amongst people, some of whom have 3 or 4 homes, some of whom are sleeping on the street. I mean, when you get to a certain extreme, there's no more trust among people. There's very little shared vision, shared assumptions. And we're getting to that point.
It's every man for himself.
Yeah, well, yes, and he who dies with the most toys wins. A charming epitaph to the 80s, if there ever was one.
Barbara Ehrenreich died in 2022. She was 84. Now you can get your copy of Fear of Falling by Barbara Ehrenreich by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 2006 conversation with comedian and activist Annabelle Gurwitch.
Someone told me recently, Bill, someone said, my boss came in, he was an executive at a company, and said, guess what? You're becoming unexpectedly leisured.
And my 1998 talk with P.J. O'Rourke.
Economics tells you how things happen, and it tells you why things happen. But all we really care about in our personal lives is what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And economics is as useless as a Ouija board on those subjects.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, he was a college basketball star, a star in the NBA, a Hall of Famer. But he had a simmering anger. My 1995 interview with Hall of Famer Chet Walker.
Everybody's making a lot of money except the poor kids that come out of the projects like I did. I was brainwashed and believing that this is in my best interest. This is my way out of the ghetto, and I took it.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.